This is so great. Date night. Just the three of us. I'm just saying. And this is such a good movie, too. I mean, at the end, when it's revealed the grandmother did it. Are you kidding? Would you be quiet and move your gigantic head? It's like, hello, I can't see the screen. Ow, hey, was that Jordan? Whoa, that's cool.
Now, all Hanes underwear is tagless. Go tagless.
I'm sure most of you see that commercial, but I laugh every time because some of our kids, the tags just get them, and they can't watch the movie because the tag is talking to them or being a bother. So I thought it was a pretty humorous thing to get us warmed up tonight. So thanks again, to reiterate what Glenn said, thank you for coming tonight. We're going to go over tonight kind of what we're going to do is we're going to go over each of our sensory systems. We're going to talk about how they affect what we do every day, and how that affects our different ways that we interact with each other. You're going to get some tips and strategies on things to do at home, and then we'll kind of wrap it all up as one. So we're going to start off with, it's going to be kind of a lot of information just about what sensory is, and then we'll move into some more practical application from that, okay? So I like to give you guys a visual as to what sensory integration really looks like. This is obviously a house. These are our senses down here and the foundation. So the foundation of all of our motor skills, our interaction skills, our higher level thinking skills come from our sensory processing and sensory systems. So we've taken all this information through our various senses, and we'll get into each one of those in just a minute. And then from all of that information, we start to build up into the body of our house, where we have a body schema, awareness, motor planning, postural control, and then up into the roof, where we have more of our refined skills, our refined motor skills, our visual spatial, auditory language, that coordination, attention, and then again the kind of higher level cognitive thinking. Okay, so this is just a picture for you to think of that sensory is a very basic level. I kind of equate it to the ability, the needs for sensory is as driven as the need for food. So if I don't get the sensory sensation that I'm seeking, it's like I didn't get to eat that day. So it's very basic, and I have to have those basics met before I can build up into the rest of my house. And those things that we want our kids to do. We want them to be able to sit and attend in school and learn the things they need to do and play and socialize with their peers. So. These are all of our senses. So in addition to our 5 senses that we all learned about when we were in grade school, there are 2 other senses. Hidden senses is what we call them. Those 2 are vestibular and proprioception, which we'll get into in quite a little bit of detail in just a minute. We also have touch. Vestibular, proprioceptive, and touch within the framework of sensory integration are the 3 most important senses, because they're really what develops our body schema and what develops our sense of awareness of who we are and are in space. So those 3 are very important in the framework of sensory integration. The others are important as well, but those are our foundational ones. So our other 4 are also important. Okay, so first is the vestibular system. I always start with vestibular because that's kind of the king sensory system. So when we look at it, if the vestibular system has issues, a lot of times some of our other systems will have issues. And we as OTs, we love the vestibular system because it makes a really big impact on our kids, and it's a very important part of what we do. So just like every sensory system, it has receptors. The receptors for the vestibular system are in the inner ears. It's responsible for balance. It tells us which direction we're moving, how fast we're moving, if we're upside down, right side up. It does that by responding to the pull of gravity. And it does have a direct effect on our arousal levels and attention. Most of us don't notice this system because it works quite well. Does anyone ever have a little vertigo? I know I have. It's pretty, you're kind of out of commission, right? You can't do much. It's a tiny little system in your inner ear, but when you're dizzy, you're really out of commission. And so it's a very, a small system that we can't really see, but very important. So just for a minute, I want you to take just a second, and I just want you to shake your head back and forth really fast. And then stop. So you guys notice a change? A little more alert? More awake? It's a very, very small movement, but it changed. I saw people perk up, I saw people. So that's how impactful that vestibular system is. So It's a very important system in what we're doing here, and trying to get that organized, because if it is not organized, it can cause a lot of disruption. Proprioceptive system, that sensory system has its receptors in our muscles and joints, both for our body awareness, balance and postural control. It works very closely with the vestibular system in that. And it's responsible for the force of movement and grading of movement. So it's basically what allows us to know where our arm is without looking, how hard we shut the door. So I'd like to have a volunteer. If no one volunteers, I'll volunteer someone from the back. Any brave souls? All right, great, thank you.
You were going to pick me anyways.
And you are?
I'm Bobby.
Nice to meet you, Bobby. Thank you for volunteering. Okay, I have 2 boxes over here.
Okay.
Okay, this is inside the box, okay? So take a feel of it. I want you to use your sensory systems, proprioceptive, tactile, feel how heavy it is, what shape it is, and it is in this box. So I want you to use that information and pick up that box. Okay, how about this one?
It's not that one.
Okay, good. You're right, I tricked you. It was not in either box. What happened when you tried to pick up this box? Did you use enough force?
No.
What did you have to do?
I had to use more force.
Right, you had to make an adjustment. So basically, I tricked him. Thank you for volunteering. I tricked him but he used his sensory systems to make that, especially proprioception, adjustment in how much force he was going to use to raise that box. Now, because he has good sensory processing, his brain said, oh, that wasn't enough force, I need to use more. And he was able to pick up the box. Our kids sometimes don't get that information. They just keep doing it over and over, or maybe they use too much and they didn't notice it was too much. We'll get into that a little bit later, but thank you for that visual. All right, tactile. Tactile is a big one because its receptor is our skin, which is our largest sensory organ. We all have a lot of skin. We take in a lot of information through our tactile system. We do a lot of things that it tells us. It tells us types of textures, localizing touch, where we were touched, how hard, how soft. Those are all really important pieces for us to gain information about our environment. It's also our earliest bonding sensory system. Children and babies bond quite well with their mothers and caregivers through the tactile system. So it's a very important system, and a lot of information is coming in through that system, so it can be very disruptive to a lot of our kids. If I have tactile sensitivities and the tag is bothering me, I'm getting a lot of information from that tactile. It's really hard to block that if I'm over-responsive to it. Auditory. To be honest, in our research of sensory integration, auditory has a lot of impact on those 3 that we talked about at the beginning, the vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile. But a lot of our research is showing that auditory is a part of that as well. So the founder of sensory integration was beginning her research on auditory, and then she passed away, and we're still kind of trying to finish it up. But it is adjacent to the vestibular system in the ears. It helps us with sound localization, auditory discrimination. It's also one of 2 senses that is a distance sense. So with visual and auditory, I get information, and I don't have to be there. I can hear someone across the room say something, and I can pick that up. Same thing with visual. So it's important in kind of an innate sense for danger awareness, things like that. So that is sometimes where our kids get that fear with the auditory. It's designed to alert us to an oncoming fear in a more innate sense. Visual. Visual is our most heavily relied upon sensory system. It's actually our dominant sensory system. So anyone ever been to IMAX and gotten motion sickness in there? You weren't moving, but your visual system told you you were. So it actually dominates over vestibular. So it can trick you into thinking you're moving when you're not, and vice versa. So if I get very seasick, and they always tell you to watch the horizon because the horizon doesn't move. So you're trying to use your visual system to trick your vestibular system. So it is dominant. And we take in a ton of information through our visual system. A lot of our kids that have difficulties in those other areas will compensate through their visual system, and it's pretty effective. So when we look at visual, we also look at ocular motor, acuity, visual perception, math right there. And then we have our smell and taste. These two don't have a real big impact on what we do in sensory integration, but we all know that they're really important. Some of our kids have trouble tolerating a certain smell or taste, and that affects their ability to be in a room or to eat certain things. So these are definitely things that we want to pay attention to. Alright, so all of that information on our 7 sensory systems. And then we bring into the theory of what's called sensory integration. So sensory integration is really made up of 3 aspects. Modulation, which is registration and regulation, which we're going to spend quite a bit of time in today, going over a lot of that. That's usually what causes when someone comes to receive an occupational therapy evaluation. A lot of times it's because we have a difficulty in modulation. So it can be very disruptive to a person's life and ability to function. The next part is discrimination. And that's the ability to determine and understand the aspects of the input. So it's not just where, as modulation, I say, oh, I know I'm moving, now I know which direction I'm moving. Or, oh, I know I was touched, I know I was touched hard, or I was a soft thing that I touched. That's discrimination. As well as, oh, he touched me on my back versus my arm. And then finally praxis, which is kind of up in that house section versus down on the foundation, which is our motor planning. And that's the ability to plan, initiate, carry out, and terminate movement. So when our Bobby picked up our box, he had to make a motor plan using that sensory information that he gave. So he felt it, judged it, and made a motor plan on how he was going to pick up that box. He used those sensory systems to do that. So we'll spend a little time on that towards the end. Alright, so let's talk about modulation. So modulation is what we talk about with over-responsive and under-responsive. So when a child's under-responsive, he needs more input to elicit a response. So these are your kids who will be out on the swing and they'll spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin, and you think they could probably swing all day and never come inside? Who's under-responsive to this singular? A child who's over-responsive to, say, auditory, he's got his hands over his ears, or tactile, or friend with the tag in the shirt is maybe over-responsive to tactile. I can't filter that out. It's too.
We are cognition overrides sensory processing most of the time. So has anyone, let's say for example that you had something something on you and there, don't scratch at that, right? It's bothering you, it's itching, okay, don't scratch. You can override that innate urge to scratch because you know cognitively if I do, it's going to injure it more or whatever that may be. And so your cognition overrides your sensory. However, there's a point where that doesn't happen. So I like to use the example of a spider because spiders are like my no-go thing. So if I had a spider crawling on my back, I don't care if I was doing a presentation. I would be getting that thing off my back right now. I can't filter that out. At that point, my cognitive ability to say, it's just a spider and keep doing what you're doing, isn't going to work. So that's, each of us have a threshold at some point where our cognition doesn't override. On the flip side, when we have a child who is using a lot of cognition, don't scratch that, don't scratch that, don't scratch that, how much learning do you think he's doing? Probably not as much as he should. Not as much as he could, because he's too busy. Sit still, sit still, sit still. Don't get in trouble. Just sit still. Okay, just sit still. Oh, I just missed what the teacher said. Okay, so it's, even though sometimes we can hold it together, we might lose something as a result. So our sensory modulation affects our arousal levels, and that's a part that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. Everything that we do, all of the sensory input that we go throughout our day can cause us to go up or down or get more excited, less excited. So that's part of what our modulation is for. If we're over-responsive and we need to calm down, we might choose to use a deep pressure tactile. Anyone heard of a sensory diet? It's kind of a big catchphrase right now, I think, big thing. Okay. So the purpose of a sensory diet is to put different parts of sensory input into your day so that you're able to maintain this arousal level that I can sit and learn and play, talk to my friends and get through dinner. And some of us have different level, need more input than another. And some of us need more calming input and some of us need more alerting input. And that's the idea behind a sensory diet, is to keep that arousal level in that kind of just right state. So each of us use those all the time. I'm someone who kind of needs to move a lot. I get up, I go for a jog, and I'm ready to go. If I didn't get my movement for the day, I'm sluggish. You know, each of us use those things. On the flip side, when you might be nervous, you pace around, kind of rock in place, and we're using that movement to self-calm. That's what we need our kids to do. They just don't always do it automatically, or they need so much sensory that just that normal everyday movement or input isn't enough. So they need more to get that arousal level just right. So that's the purpose of the sensory diet. And I should also note that each task that we do requires a different arousal level. So obviously when we're about to go to sleep, we don't need to have a high arousal level. I'm sure some of you deal with that with your kids, and you can't calm down at night. But likewise, you know, when we're about to run a marathon, you need pretty high arousal level. You need a high arousal level to concentrate on a task and do a good work. So we need different arousal levels throughout our day, and that's where the sensory diet comes in to help put those into place if our child's not able to regulate himself. However, the end goal is that he is able to regulate himself without those sensory supports, and that's the end goal of sensory integration therapy. So the sensory diet is kind of like your get there, and then we want that child to be able to get the input he needs throughout his day to keep himself regulated. All right, here's a couple of signs of being over-aroused. So difficulty sitting still, decreased attention, chewing on things, outbursts, distractibility. Is this describing anyone's child? So it can be a sign that our child is not in that right state of arousal for whatever task we're asking him to do. I see this a lot of times, and just that they have trouble listening, processing, they're not on task. So a lot of those pieces that the sensory input can help calm and organize them. These are just a couple of suggestions. I'm going to let you guys kind of, maybe if you want to jot these down, they're general activities to lower arousal level. When you're trying to kind of organize yourself, lower your arousal level, you want to think weight bearing, proprioception, deep pressure tactile. Those are really good things to go to. When it comes to our sensory systems, the proprioceptive system is always an organizing system. So I always tell parents, if in doubt, do prop. So heavy work, proprioception. I'm going to show you some handouts in a little bit that will have some more information for you guys on that. Okay, under arousal. Kind of laying on the floor or table, staring off into space, slouching in a chair, you don't want to participate. I call these kids kind of like they're kind of slugs. They just kind of, everything's kind of, you can't get them excited. Sometimes they're under aroused, so they need some extra input to get. So these are activities to raise arousal. You're jumping, you're spinning, your head shakes like we did at the beginning. Movement-based learning, your head swings, anything that you're getting a lot of kind of brisk movement, short bursts of movement, things like that. Up and down is the learning. So I'm going to show you guys, these are some handouts that we actually have available for you. They are on our links to it on our webpage and our Pinterest page. So this is kind of a nice variety of activities that can raise and lower a child's arousal. And in each page, they're kind of broken down into, these are calming activities and these are alerting activities. I will preface that every child is different, so you really do need to consult with your OT to make sure that you're choosing the right activity. Vestibular can be very, very disruptive if it's not given in the right way. So you really need to make sure that you know your child's vestibular system. If you don't, you need to consult with the OT so that you know what kind of input to get, because if you give the wrong, you're just going to bring them into a state of distress. So, those will be okay, so that's kind of sensory modulation. And again, it's really important for us to stay regulated, to keep ourselves in that, oh, I can pay attention, I can socialize with my friends, and all of our sensory input affects how our arousal level changes. A lot of times that's where our difficulties with our kids begin. Oh, I can't I can't focus because all I can think about is I can't wear that clothing, I can't wear those socks, I can't tolerate that sound. All I can think about is that. So I don't have a good arousal. I'm always in a state of stress because I never know who's going to touch me or what's next, and am I going to move the wrong way and it's going to make me sick. So we can have those difficulties. Or on this flip side, man, I didn't get my movement today. I gotta go. I gotta move. I mean, this is an innate thing that you telling me to sit in my chair isn't working for me. I gotta get going. My body's telling me I need to get going. So that's a big piece of where some of our kids are. The next kind of level up from all of that sensory modulation is praxis. So praxis is actually motor planning. It's in that house part. Sometimes our kids, this is kind of after you work through their modulation difficulties, you'll see maybe they have some praxis issues, and some kids don't have modulation difficulties, they just have praxis difficulties. So this is kind of the ability to plan, initiate, carry out, terminate movement. It's an automatic ability to figure out how to execute motor actions. It's the ability to look at something and know how to do it. So I don't have to think about it. Did you have to think about the box? Did you just pick it up, right? You knew kind of innately how much force to use, and you picked it up. So that's a motor plan. There's in sensory integration, there's two types of motor planning that we look at. One is somatodyspraxia, which is a big long word to say we have a lot of trouble with proprioceptive and tactile input. Okay, I'm getting wrong information, just like I tricked him with he got the wrong information, so he made the wrong motor plan. That's where a lot of our kids are. They got the wrong information from their sensory systems because they had modulation difficulty, and so they made the wrong motor plan. So it's a hard thing. Bilateral coordination and sequencing tends to be a little bit the next kind of step of praxis. These kids tend to have difficulties with a lot of coordinating the two sides of the body, sequencing movements, that maybe you're quote-unquote clumsy child, things like that. Okay, so I put this picture down because I thought it was kind of a nice way to show that how this is praxis. Somehow I started banging a block, then I started stacking a block, then I started building structures. That's a form of praxis. Nobody really taught someone how to build a structure, you just kind of picked it up, so to say. So that's praxis in a nutshell. And it is the result of good sensory processing. When I get the right information from all of my sensory systems, I'm able to make the right motor plan and make that response. If I would have given him the right information, if that item was in the box, probably would have used the right force, right? Probably would have picked it up correctly. So we usually do a pretty good job of getting that information. It's our basis for skill building and our foundation for play. Our kids that have difficulties with praxis, really, things are hard. I mean, and it seems that, man, how many times am I gonna have to teach you to put your shoes on? Like, you just put your foot in the shoe, but it's different every time, and I just can't figure it out. And sometimes it's this shoe I can handle, and I can't put it into this shoe. I can't generalize that skill. So these kids have a lot of hard time with just sometimes what we think are just everyday easy things, and they're really hard for them because they're not able to process that sensory information well and make that right motor plan. So these kids can get frustrated, obviously. I mean, if I always think that if I was presented with an activity and I failed at it every time I tried, how likely am I going to be to try it again? Not very likely. Do you think I might run away or have a tantrum if I was, a younger kid and I knew I was going to fail at that activity? So sometimes our behaviors that we call are a result of frustration, and they don't have another motor plan to go to. I only know one way to do it, and if it doesn't work, I don't have other options. We have other options. It didn't work, I'll try this, I'll try that, let me look at it this way. These kids don't have other options, so it can be very frustrating for them. The idea when we're treating praxis disorders in sensory integration therapy is we're trying to help those sensory systems process better, so I do get the right feedback from my environment. And then I'm able to work on those skill building. So first I want to process that information correctly, and then I want to work on that skill building. So if you have some kids that have trouble with those tasks, those everyday tasks that seem to be pretty simple, or maybe have practice disorders, these are some steps to success. I always try to break down the most tasks that we do every day. It seems like it's one step, but it's actually a series of steps. So if you can break the task down into small steps and ensure success. So again, if I'm successful at a task, I'm more likely to try it again. If I failed at a task, I'm less likely to try it again. So I want to try to break it down so that they can be successful in one step of the task. Teaching one step at a time, providing that extra time. Sometimes the routines and schedules. A lot of times these kids have difficulties with changes in routines or schedules because, well, I know how to do it when we do it this way, but when you change it, I don't know what to do. And again, that motor planning piece comes in, and I don't know how to make the adjustment. I don't have another option. I offer help a lot, and it doesn't have to be physical help. I do a lot of verbal cueing and tactile cues. So instead of having a frustrating moment, like, let's work through this together. And sometimes having a partner to model, or if you have a sibling that can help model, is a good thing. It's not always possible. The biggest thing is to ensure success with the task so that I can return, and you want to provide just as much help as you can while still letting the child do as much as he can and be successful at that task. So if you're working on putting your shoes on, can you put your toe in, and then I'll help you push it down. I mean, it can just be so small, things like that, and so that the child has some control over what they're doing, and they can get some independence in that. And then again, I talked about that already, so breaking them down using auditory and tactile cues. So we'll spend a couple minutes just on sensory behavior, because I think that's usually a big question that we get. Well, is it sensory, is it behavior? I don't know. Bottom line is, it's usually a little bit of both. So behavior, of course, we know, everyone knows it's communication. It always has an antecedent, it always has a reason that it happened. Your job is to try to figure out what that is. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But sensory affects behavior, and behavior affects sensory. So I say that because, let's go back to that child that is over-responsive to tactile. So the wind's hitting his skin, and it's making him squirm, and his shirt, it's the wrong fabric, can't tolerate that today. Oh, my socks have seams in them today. And then maybe I've got some auditory sensitivities, and the kid next to me is clicking his pencil, and now I'm in this state of very high distress. He's more likely to maybe have a quote-unquote behavior. So I like to equate it as when I go to the mall at Christmas time and I get home from that, I cannot tolerate as much as I could when I was just relaxing, having a cup of coffee in the morning. So my nervous system's in a state of high alert and distress. I can't tolerate as much, tugging from your kids or whatever as you could if you were nice and relaxed. Our kids are no different. So they may be in a state of high alert, and it's wrong time, wrong kid comes and takes their paper and gone, done. You might wall up and hit you, or I'm out of the room. So that is an aspect that being in that state of high alert, you can't handle as much normal stress as you could if you were calm and organized. On the converse side, sometimes, as we talked about before, when a child has difficulties and he's trying to just sit still. Okay, the teacher is going to get mad at me if I get up again to sharpen my pencil for the 20th time, so I have to sit here. And I'm doing okay, and then all of a sudden, in comes math, and I really am not good at math, and now it's really hard, and I really need to move, and then something gives, and the kid's gone. Sometimes it's a bolt. And a lot of times your behavioral therapist may say, oh, is it avoidance of the task? Well, the task was hard, but if the kid was in a nice regulated state, he might have been able to deal with that. So that's why I say that they affect one another. And that's kind of what the bottom line is. A dysregulated child is more likely to have difficulties performing expected behaviors. We're not any different. If we're a stressed out person, we have a lot of stress because we went to the mall at Christmas and all that stuff. We can't handle as much controversy or tugging children as we could when we're in a nice calm state. So, all right. So that's everything kind of in a nutshell. I'll let you read this quote because it's one of my favorite quotes. I always put it at the end of my presentations because I really think Jean Ayres is the founder of sensory integration therapy, and she wrote this quote. I think that this is our goal. We want our kids to have highly adaptive behaviors. Learning is easy, and good behavior is a natural outcome. I think that's what we want for our kids. And a lot of times our kids may have difficulties in modulation, and they can't regulate themselves, or they're always over responsive to something, or they're not getting enough movement in their day, and they just have to move all the time. They can't pay attention because they have to move, and they're not able to do these things. And that's where the sensory integration therapy comes in, and we want to help them process those things better in their brain, and we want those changes to be made. And those changes, when we look at SI therapy, are real changes. They're changes that last. It's not that you have to continue with the therapy. You can finish it, and then you kind of get your own sensory diet that we all have. We all have different things we do during the day, and you're good to go. Or maybe you have difficulties with praxis. So again, we want those sensory systems to process better. We want our brains to be able to understand that input and make those right adaptations. So that then we can have balanced body movements. We can have easy learning and good behavior. That's what we want for our kids. That's what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for our kids. So that is, I think about it. I put this up here because our Pinterest page does have those handouts on it. So you might want to follow us. It's kind of small, but it's Pinterest.com/pillarchild. Follow us on Facebook. We'll have some tips and links as well as information for upcoming seminars or social skills classes or things that are going on. So I'll take just a couple of general questions, and then we'll just kind of break, and I'll be here for questions afterwards. So yeah.